Welcome to week 6 of the Freedom Ticket. This week we're going to be talking about shipping and everything you need to know about getting your product from your factory over to Amazon. So how do you ship? How does this process actually work? Well, there's a couple different options. Typically it's going to have to come by air or by sea if it's coming from China or Asia or somewhere outside the United States. There are some exceptions to that if you're sourcing within the US or perhaps in South America. You may be able to actually ship it by train or by truck. But for what we're going to talk about today is air shipping and sea shipping, because that's what most of you are going to actually be doing, because a lot of you are going to be actually sourcing in Southeast Asia. So air shipping is great for things that you need really, really quick, or if you have something that's really small and lightweight. So if you have something that's really small and lightweight and the value of your actual goods, now this is the manufacturer value, not the retail value, but the manufacturer value, is less than $2,500, you might be able to actually ship it by a common courier like a FedEx or UPS or DHL. And you can do what's called DDP, where basically they take care of everything for you. You may have to pay some import duties and taxes, but everything is kind of included for you. You don't have to actually hire your own customs broker, or you don't have to hire your own freight forwarder. They basically do it all for you. And a lot of times it's actually cheaper for your Chinese factory to actually ship it using their account than it is for you to actually use your own account, because they get some discounted rates coming out of China. Now, if you got a heavy volume account and you've negotiated some discounted rates, you actually might be able to beat what they get, but always double check what your rate is and compare that to what rate they're actually getting and see which one is cheaper. And so that's if your items are small, lightweight, don't take up a lot of space, and the value is less than $2,500, FedEx, UPS, or DHL could be a good option for you. But if your items are heavier, you're actually going to probably need to ship it either by sea or by what's called air freight. And air freight is different than like a FedEx or UPS or DHL. Air freight is actually cargo in the bottom of an airplane. Sometimes those are cargo airplanes. They're specifically designed to carry air freight. They load pallets onto the bottom. Sometimes it's commercial airlines, your Cathay Pacifics or your Deltas or American Airlines, where they load pallets or even boxes onto the bottom of the plane along with the luggage. So depending on how fast you need something and what your budget is going to depend on how you ship. Most things you're going to want to try to ship by sea, because it actually is the cheapest way to actually bring stuff over, but it's also the slowest way to bring things over. Air freight can, by DHL or FedEx or UPS, can usually take between 3 to 5 days on average, versus air shipping can also be between 3 and 10 days, but sea shipping can take as much as a month, sometimes more, depending on where it's coming from. So it's definitely the slowest, but it's also by far the cheapest. So when you're shipping by sea, typically those items are going to go into a container, and there's the big metal boxes that you see, and there's the standard sizes are either a 20-foot or a 40-foot container. There's also what's called a 40-foot HQ, which has a little bit more space in it, and there's a few other variations, but most of them are either a 20-foot or a 40-foot. So a lot of times when you're talking to your factory, they'll actually quote you and they'll say, this is how many fit in a 20-foot container, or how many units fit in a 40-foot container, because no matter how much you put in that container, you're going to pay basically the same amount. There's a fee per container to actually ship it over. And it's based on volume, not on weight. So it doesn't matter so much how much it weighs, versus if you ship by air, the weight and the volume actually matter. Both of those come into play. But by sea, it's pretty much just how much space are you taking up on the ship, and they don't really care how much it weighs. So if you don't fill up an entire container, you're still going to be paying for that container. So if you have less than a container load, you're either going to be sharing that with somebody else that's shipping, that your freight forwarders combined your stuff, or you're going to be paying for a full container and it's only half full. Now the items that are in a container can be either palletized, so that means they're on those wood pallets, typically 40 inches by 48 inches, and they're stacked about 5 feet tall, or they can be what's called floor loaded. And floor loaded is actually where they just fill it up as high as they can. So depending on your 3PL or your freight forwarder and how wherever you're shipping and how they like to receive it, that'll determine how you actually pack the containers. Some people like to do them floor loaded because you can usually get more stuff in a container. You can jam it really full, but sometimes on the receiving end, they'll actually charge you a fee, an extra fee to unload those, because they got to kind of do it by hand and repalletize everything versus just taking a forklift and put it under a pallet and taking it off. So that's something you have to keep in mind as well. Now, when you're shipping by FedEx or DHL or UPS on those small orders of less than 2,500, and that's great for samples, by the way. Those are the perfect way to send samples or your small orders. You don't need a customs broker or a freight forwarder usually. But if you're shipping by air freight, and the cargo in the planes, or by sea, you're going to need a customs broker. And a lot of times this could be an independent person, or sometimes it's a part that your freight forwarder will handle this for you as well. Sometimes they either work with customs brokers or they're a customs broker themselves. And what the customs broker does, this is most common by sea shipments, but like I said, it can be they can be required on some air shipments too. They take care of all the paperwork for you. They take care of any bonds that you may need, any duties or tariffs. They organize all that and classify your stuff for you. They do all the different import documents. They make sure that you have all the stuff that's from the factory that you need. You need what's called a bill of lading. You need what's called a commercial invoice. And there's a few other documents depending on what you're shipping. They'll assemble all that stuff. The bill of lading actually is basically it's like a packing list. Basically, it says where did this stuff origin, where is it going, what's inside, what's the weights. A commercial invoice is basically what's the value of this. It's very similar to a bill of lading, slightly different format, but it's basically the value. It's basically what your factory is charging you. Just remember on the commercial invoice, this is what the taxes and duties are going to be based on. So it's actually should show the cost that you're paying for the goods, not the retail price. And some factories, like we mentioned in another module, will offer to reduce that. If your actual cost is $10, they may say, we'll put this as $5 if you want us to. That way you pay less duties and taxes. Don't do that. That can get you into some really hot trouble. So if your factory offers to do that, don't do that. Just be honest about it, because the penalties and fines can be very, very severe. Now, another thing that you'll need is what's called a bond. And bonds you can do a one-time bond. It's a surety bond. Those are typically about $60, or you can oftentimes get an annual bond for somewhere in the neighborhood of $350 to $400, and that'll cover you for an entire year, all your shipments, instead of paying $60 per shipment. You can go to bondsforcustoms.com, and sometimes you can get some cheaper rates there, or a lot of times your freight forwarder or your customs broker can just do it for you and bill you on that. But the bond basically means that you're guaranteeing that you're going to pay the duties and tariffs to the U.S. government when you're importing it. Another thing you can do is insurance. Some people like to insure their orders so that the ship capsizes at sea, or there's a big delay or something gets damaged. Your customs broker or freight forwarder can actually tell you about the insurance as well. Or you can go directly. There's a company called TRG Direct, and you can call them up and say how much is the insurance. It's not super expensive. I would recommend it, especially on anything that's a high value shipment. You want to make sure you have some insurance on that. You can always get an idea of what things are going to cost if you go to worldfreightquotes.com. Now, your freight forwarder is actually going to quote you a price, and this price is going to include a lot of breakdowns. It's going to include the cost of actually picking up the container if it's ex-works from the factory and getting it to the port. If it's FOB, it won't include that additional cost. It'll be just from the port to loading onto the ship. It'll be whatever the shipping line is charging to actually ship that container across the sea. There'll be some documents charges, some overnight charges, a whole range. There'll be a laundry list of charges on there. So the cost is not just the container cost, but there's additional costs and paperwork charges that your freight forwarder is going to charge you. So make sure you don't forget about those when you're doing your estimating. If you go to like worldfreightquotes.com and it says it's $4,000 to ship a 20-foot container from Shanghai to Long Beach, there's going to be additional costs on top of that of anywhere from I would add about 20% as just a kind of rule of thumb on top of that for document fees and things. And then you also have tariffs and duties. And as of right now, a lot of goods coming out of China have a 25% tariff on them that Trump implemented. And it hasn't been withdrawn yet. So not all goods have that. Some are 15%, some are 25%, some are 0%. So that can be a big factor into your cost. So you got to check and see what HS code. And HS codes are a universal code that shippers use to classify goods. So every good has a specific HS code, and the tariff and the duty depends on the HS code. Some items also have anti-dumping. So like the U.S. doesn't want certain types of glass being shipped into the U.S. or are certain types of steel products because we have our own manufacturing here. And so they don't want a lot of stuff coming in from other countries that's competing against our own manufacturing. So they have some really high fees called anti-dumping that can add up too. So you want to make sure that whatever you're bringing in doesn't fall under one of those anti-dumping classifications. Now your freight forwarder is someone who's going to basically handle everything from the origin to the destination. So a lot of times you can just pick up the phone and say, hey, Johnny, I've got an order at XYZ factory in Shenzhen. I need it sent to my warehouse in Dallas. Here's the addresses, here's what it is. Go get it. And they take care of everything from A to Z. And you basically, other than having to pay them and maybe coordinate a couple little things with them as far as delivery times, you're completely out of it. They take care of everything for you. Whether it's Ex Works or whether it's FOB, they take care of all the documentation, all the paperwork. They can also sometimes, if you need additional labeling done, they can do some additional labeling for you, or combining different things. Or they can even do combining shipments. If you got stuff coming from different factories and you want to combine it into one container, they can oftentimes do that kind of thing too, where they'll stage it somewhere in China and wait till everything is full in container and then ship it on. So a good freight forwarder is super critical to have. And later on in this week, some of the modules you're going to actually learn from one of the top freight forwarders in the business, Unicargo. And they're going to be sharing with you some really cool tips and strategies and several modules later this week. They go really in depth on some of the stuff that you need to know when it comes to shipping and freight. Another thing that you got to make sure you're aware of is that you have to have an importer of record. And the importer of record can't be Amazon. Even if you're shipping directly to Amazon, it has to be you. So usually the importer of record is actually you as your company. So make sure that you don't try to put that as to somebody else. That can cause some problems as well. Now, when your factory's preparing things, you're going to have what's called master cartons. And the master cartons, or some people call them cases, this is where you have 10, 50, 100, how it depends on the size of your item, all in one big master case. And on the outside of those master cartons, you've got to actually put some information for import. One of those is you have to put where it was made. So on the outside of that carton, it needs to say, if it's made in China, it needs to say made in China. Or made in Vietnam, it needs to say made in Vietnam. You oftentimes can put your SKU on there. If you have a SKU, or you can put your ASIN if you want to do that, or your UPC code. You want to put what's in the package. Just a short little title of what's in there. It's calendars, or it's socks, or it's resistance bands, whatever it may be. Usually you want to put that on the outside. And then you want to usually put a box number. It's box number X out of 100. So that if the stuff is floor loaded and it's getting repacked and repalletized once it hits the port, they kind of have an idea of how many total boxes should there actually be. And then you can put some additional information on there if you want, but those are the critical ones that need to go on the outside of your cases. Now, some people in the past have always recommended that you ship directly to Amazon, especially if you're a traveling nomad and you're wandering around the U.S. or you don't live in the U.S. A lot of people have always shipped directly into Amazon. And I really don't recommend that, especially with the new limits that Amazon has. If you're shipping 100 units or something in, maybe that's okay. But in most cases, you're going to either want to ship to your own house or your own place and store the items there and then ship them onto Amazon, or you're going to need to set up a third-party logistics company or a warehouse to actually ship your items to. And especially as you grow, you're going to need that. Maybe not in the beginning, but as you grow, you're going to need that because Amazon has limitations on how much you can actually ship in. And when you first start your account, you're going to be limited to 1,000 units, no matter, and that's not 1,000 of everything you're selling, that's 1,000 units total. And if you're selling something that's selling, 50 units a day, for example, you're going to have to order, somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 to 5,000 units. Well, you can't ship all those into Amazon at once. So you're going to have to send those to a third-party logistics company or a warehouse, store those, and let them then forward on 1,000 to Amazon, and then continually refill that at Amazon as needed. As the stock starts to run down, they'll ship more in and keep the Amazon warehouse fed. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Shipping directly to Amazon, also, I don't like it because sometimes your product will get damaged along the way and it's not really being checked. And I've had issues in the past where I shipped directly into Amazon and the product arrives all beat up, and I get some bad reviews. So I'm not a huge fan of shipping directly on Amazon. I would highly recommend you actually send to yourself and then reship it in, or send it to a third-party logistics or a warehouse that'll handle all that for you. And Unicargo is a company that can do some of that for you as well. They can stage it and store it. They've got warehouses around the world where they can do that. And I'm sure Rafael will talk about that in some of the modules coming up later in this week. Another thing that you want to keep in mind is when you're actually shipping into Amazon, the rates that Amazon gives you are super low. They've got some extremely low negotiated rates. So as long as you're not shipping hazardous goods, if you're shipping hazardous goods, you're going to have to use your own accounts to ship into Amazon. But if you're shipping anything besides hazardous goods, you can actually go into Seller Central, and we're going to do a little walkthrough a little bit later in another module and show you how this works, and actually ship in to Amazon using Amazon's accounts at UPS or FedEx or even some of the trucking lines. And the negotiated rates are super cheap, and it's going to be hard for you to beat those. So when that's something to consider as well, and that's an added cost. And remember, the product evaluation spreadsheet that I showed you in a previous week, it actually takes into consideration these costs to actually ship into Amazon from either your house or from a 3PL. Now, when you ship into Amazon, they dictate which warehouses they go to. Amazon's got several hundred warehouses around the United States, and so they're going to either pick between 1 and 3 warehouses that you ship into. And it's based on an algorithm that Amazon determines, and it can change over time. Sometimes you get to ship right up the street to you. Sometimes you have to ship all the way across the country, and that can be an added cost as well. If you're shipping in big bulky items or a lot of stuff, you can ship what's called LTL, or less than truckload, or in some cases you may have a full truckload, and that's palletized items. And so Amazon has partnered carriers for that, which can be dirt cheap as well. The only thing is, when you're shipping into Amazon, if you're shipping in via LTL, via palletized freight, it can take sometimes a long time for the stuff to actually get checked in, because it all gets consolidated, and then these freight companies have to make appointments, and then they have to go and the trucks have to sit in line and wait for their time to check in, and sometimes they have to come back the next day, especially during the fourth quarter or some of the busy warehouses. It can be a nightmare sometimes. So if at all possible, if your product meets the criteria, I would always try to ship in UPS ground or FedEx ground if possible. It's going to get checked in a lot faster. It might cost you slightly more, but the speed of check-in is dramatically faster, because those companies have standing delivery appointments at all the different Amazon warehouses. When you're deciding which way to ship, whether it be by a courier like a FedEx or UPS or DHL, or by air cargo or by sea, there's some other criteria you need to keep in mind that could matter which way you ship. For a courier, typically you want to be less than 150 kilos. So anything that's coming by DHL or FedEx typically is ideal for less than 150 kilos. It's definitely the fastest way, but it's also the most expensive way. So if you need something in a hurry, then that's definitely the way to go, but just keep in mind it's also the most expensive way. It's great for samples, but the cost on this can be as high as $15 to $20 per kilo. So it can get up there really, really fast. Now, if you're shipping by air is if you need something in a hurry, but maybe it's a little bit more or a little bit heavier or a little bit larger in size, then air can be a good option if you need it quickly. It'll be a little bit cheaper than using a courier, but it's great for things that are palletized or larger case items. It's good for things between about 150 and 500 kilos is where air would be an ideal. Now, air rates are constantly in flux. They can be anywhere from about $5 a kilo to as high as $12 to $14 a kilo during like the pandemic and stuff. So even higher than that in some cases. So you just have to quote that out. And remember, when you're shipping by air, volume and weight matter. So you could have something that's super lightweight, but if it takes up a lot of space, then you're going to get charged through the nose for that, even though it's not very heavy. The other way is sea shipping. Sea shipping is definitely the cheapest, and it's also the slowest. Sea shipping is great for things that are over 500 kilos. So if your total shipment is over 500 kilos, definitely consider doing it by sea. But the problem with sea shipments is instead of arriving in 3 to 8 days, it's typically about 3 to 4 weeks. And sometimes there can be even additional delays if there's port congestion or something like that. And sea shipping can vary. The prices have gone through the roof recently. In the past, a 20-foot container coming from China to the U.S. might be $3,000 to $4,000, and a 40-foot container $5,000 to $6,000. I've seen those prices double recently, and in some cases even triple, because there's a shortage out there of containers, and the demand right now, because of the pandemic that happened in 2020, just backed everything up, and there's still a catch-up going on as of this moment. So the rates for sea shipping have gone up. They might stabilize or go down slightly, but I don't know that they'll go back down to the pre-pandemic levels. So sea shipping, you want to make sure you quote around and get a good quote, because they do vary widely depending on the port that's coming from and who's doing the actual shipping and capacity. But your freight forwarder should be able to handle that for you. So the bottom line is, you got to decide, is it time or money? Which is more important to you, the time or the money? So if you want to ship by air, there's Premium Express, which will get to you in usually like 2 to 3 days. There's Express, which is about 3 to 4 days. There's Premium, which is about 5 to 8 days, and then there's Standard Air, which can take anywhere from 8 to 10 days. And then when you're coming by sea, there's actually a premium option by sea. It's like a fast boat by sea. That can be 18 to 30 days, and then the standard is 30 days plus. Now, Amazon also has a program, it's nicknamed Dragon Boat, where they will do some of the logistics for you as well. So you can take a look at that in Seller Central if you want to actually use Amazon's shipping, and they actually will help coordinate some of that stuff, and they coordinate it straight from the factory straight into Amazon. But you can find out more information of that on Seller Central. One of the consideration you got to keep in mind is if you're shipping wood items, anything that's wood, and that includes pallets that stuff is stacked on, you have to have fumigation certificates, or you have to have all these different documents that show that these are bug-free. You're not bringing in pesticides or pests into the country that you're importing into. So that's something you got to keep in mind as well. So hopefully this has helped you, and look forward to seeing you in the next module.